And we're joined now by Grant Stoner, who is a freelance writer regularly covering accessibility in games and who contributes some awesome columns and pieces for IGN, including the review of the PlayStation Access controller, which you just recently reviewed last week. It's officially out, and you gave it a 7, which is good. But I'm kind of curious about just your experience with it and what did Sony get right and what didn't they?
Yeah, the Access controller is the first accessible piece of hardware that PlayStation released since ever, really. And it's one of the best pieces of software I've ever used. The customizability you can alter any of the buttons, of the 9 buttons. You can change each button so that there's toggles. So for example, if I'm pressing R1 in a game for like aiming, I can set a setting in the software where it's permanently held until I press it again, which is incredible. I don't think any system or controller has ever done that before. There's also settings where you can adjust multiple buttons for one button. So for example, with God of War, when activating Spartan Rage, you need usually 2 buttons to trigger it. But with the Access controller, you can set up a piece of software where you just press one button and it accesses both until you press it again, which is incredible. It's some of the best, if not the best software for accessibility I've ever used in gaming, ever.
That's awesome.
My biggest issues are the design of it, the physical layout, because of its circular shape. It's really hard to use and reach, especially if you have limited reach or atrophy hands like myself. And because it's a circle, no matter which position I put it in, I still have the same issue. There's no different configuration that works for me, regardless of where it is on my table. And also the buttons are really hard to press, which I thought was really strange for a controller meant for physically disabled players. Oftentimes, disabled players have limited strength and limited dexterity, which means that smaller buttons or buttons with like an awkward surface angle are really hard to press. Thankfully, the Access controller mitigates that with its different button caps. There's 5 total. 4 of them are the ones you're going to be using primarily. The 5th one is a wider button cap that goes over 2 buttons. But again, the issue is regardless of what button cap I'm using, it's still very difficult for me to press each button.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is a quandary because, like, as you said in your review, like there's no like one universal disability. Like everyone's dealing with different issues. So this might be a great fix for one person, but again, you've got your share of complaints. How do you think it compares to what Microsoft did with their accessibility controller?
That question is one of my favorites because they're not really comparable. Because the one controller is specifically like a hub. It's meant for full customization, the Xbox controller. I wouldn't even call it a controller per se. I'd much rather they would have called it, like I said, a hub, because the base controller itself only features 2 buttons and then like the D-pad. Everything else is meant to be customized with external switches or joysticks or buttons that you can get from Microsoft, Logitech, or various third-party vendors. The Access controller is a controller. It's not a full controller. It only includes 9 of a traditional controller's 15 buttons. So you're still missing out, even with the 4 external ports that the Access controller has.
That's such an odd choice. Like that feels almost like it's not it's an accessory to an accessory.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a full-fledged controller. It's almost like a, you know, like an ancillary sort of peripheral.
It's not meant for by itself use, because you're not going to be able to do every single game with just one controller. You either need a DualSense, which you can pair it with. You either need another Access controller, which you can pair it with. You can even pair two Access controllers with a DualSense to have a full set that way, which acts as one controller. But on its own, disabled players are not going to be able to just pick up all the bots and fully play, let's say,
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2. You're going to need to either continuously reconfigure your button layouts for certain situations, or you're going to need another controller to pick up what the Atlas doesn't have.
That's such a
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jada.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing. What's something that these accessibility controllers are missing that you think would be like that would help them like kind of live up to what they need to do?
For PlayStation first, greater input from a wider array of physically disabled players. The Access controller is amazing, but it feels like it was designed for a very specific type of physical disability. People who can move their arms, people who can maybe extend their hands, people who have greater finger dexterity and strength, maybe in their palms, because it's a circle, you can basically just open palm the device. I feel like, I could be wrong with this, but I feel like it was designed primarily for quadriplegics and paraplegics, not people with muscular dystrophy like I have, or people with maybe limb difference, or people with just atrophied hands. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because it shows the breadth of the disabled experience, but not every physically disabled player will be able to use this device. And for Xbox, I think the biggest issue is just price. A full setup to have every button and switch usable costs approximately $300 to $400 for one controller. My setup alone was $360, and it's not even finished. There are still some buttons that I haven't purchased yet. And a lot of disabled people are on fixed incomes, where they have to choose between, maybe rent, food, medication. And if you have to allot over $300 for a controller, that device isn't really accessible.
That sucks. Yeah, I mean, like I was looking at it, and it's a huge step forward that the Microsoft thing and the Access exist, and they're I feel like they're reasonably priced on their own, but on their own they're also not really completing the assignment. They're not really checking all their boxes. So, it's a small step forward, I guess. I'm curious though. This has allowed you to actually, get into PlayStation, and you've been playing a bunch of games, and it sounds like you're having a good time. I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of your favorite moments you've had so far playing PS5 games, and what are some of the things that that have disappointed you about using this?
Yeah, PlayStation has been one of my favorite console systems. I grew up with it. I lost the ability to play in roughly 2019. So I've never been able to play The Last of Us Part 2, which the industry continues to rightfully praise and recognize. I've never been able to play God of War on a PlayStation. I did play it on my PC. I've never been able to play Spider-Man or some other Horizon or Ratchet and Clank. So for me, it's really nice to finally open these games and see why they've been hailed as accessible for all these years. Like, just to look at the options, to see the designs, to see how they mesh with the game itself. There haven't been really any, like, defining gameplay moments. For me, it's mostly just, oh, I can finally see what these developers have been doing for years. Because even though I've been writing about the industry since 2019, I've actually never been able to play PlayStation games until now. So that's the biggest, like, oh, this is why people are celebrating games for this reason. Or, oh, this is what Sony Santa Monica did that made it award-winning last year. That's the biggest, like, whoa moment for me right now. It's just like,
That's so awesome, man.
Must be hell on your backlog.
it's awful.
So what are some games that like have kind of done well in the accessibility in your eyes this year? Like, you know, we were talking about Street Fighter 6 earlier, and like I know they added like the dynamic control where you basically push one button to fight. Has there been any others that like how was that for? Have you messed around with Street Fighter 6? How does that like? Does that appeal to you? What other ones have you seen that have come out this year that have been like, you know, solid accessibility picks?
Yeah, so Street Fighter 6 is the first Street Fighter game I've been able to fully play and actually, I don't want to say master, but play enough where like I'm consistently winning matches. I'm much more of a Mortal Kombat fan because the inputs are simplified, but with Street Fighter's modern controls, I'm actually able to play and compete. Over the summer, I was in a community-hosted tournament that was all for disabled players, and I made top 8, which is really exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I've never been in a tournament before, and to be able to do that for the first time with a series that I traditionally can't play because of the accessibility is really cool. Dead Space this year is incredible, mostly because of its cognitive accessibility features. So traditionally with accessibility, developers in the industry focus on mobility, visual, and auditory. Dead Space really tackled the fourth, like, hidden accessibility pillar, which is cognitive, by adding sensors and trigger warnings and content warnings for different topics like gore, suicide, self-harm, body mutilation. And the way they did this is you can still enjoy the core themes of Dead Space, which are fear and isolation and just general terror, because you're alone throughout the entire game, but you don't have to witness like immense gore or the audio laws of that, and maybe focus on like suicide or self-harm. You can still just play the horror game without missing out on the horror aspect.
Yeah, I mean that's cool because like if it's a good enough horror story, it shouldn't need to rely on gore or shock value.
Right.
Like that's I think that shows a lot of confidence on the part of the devs to be like, yeah, we can kill that, no pun intended. Like
yeah. Mental health and cognitive accessibility are really like the last, I guess, say forefront for innovation in the industry, and to have a major horror game do it so seamlessly was really great for so many people. A lot of players I interviewed throughout the year have had PTSD, and they were able to complete the game with no issues because of those settings.
Wow.
So that's really impressive and important.
Now I want to touch on something here. I've seen you talking about this, but I think a lot of people will write off remakes as being, you know, self-indulgent on the part of developers or unnecessary or like a quick cash grab. But you hit one nail very hard on the head, which is that they also frequently add a ton of accessibility options, which is something that had never even occurred to me. I guess aside from the cognitive stuff in Dead Space, can you call out a few of other instances where that's really been noticeable?
Yeah, The Last of Us Part 1, the remake that just released, all of the features from Part 2 are now in Part 1, as well as new features like audio described cutscenes. So those are basic cutscenes that read out everything that's happening to the player. Sort of like it's acting for blind and low vision players. So if they can't see the cutscene, because those games are very like dialogue heavy and cutscene heavy, and they convey a lot of their emotion through the moments with Ellie and Joel and the supporting characters, not in the gameplay, but in like the cinematic moments. So with audio described cutscenes, they can experience like, you know, Ellie frowns as she looks at Joel in the distance. Joel shuffles his feet to the left as he moves through a corner, because it helped convey the importance of the scene and why it's relevant to the story. That was a first for the AAA industry as a whole. No AAA game has done that before, especially with that many supported languages. I don't remember exactly how many they have. I think it was over 13 supported languages for audio described cutscenes. Dead Space with its cognitive accessibility, also a lot of like physical accessibility features, which I use, like toggles for aiming and sprinting, and using your powers, floating with zero gravity. There were settings for that. They basically allow studios to use the accessibility tools that exist now that weren't possible 10 or 15 years ago.
That's
So while
amazing.
they may be like, you know, oh, why are we releasing this now? It opens it up to thousands of new players because of that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off there. I actually messed around with the audio description mode, and it is so fantastic. Like it kind of reminded me of like listening to a book on tape, like an audiobook basically. Like it just they did such a good job with it. So I'm glad that that's like beneficial to like you and the other people in the accessibility community. Like it's I'm glad Naughty Dog is doing that and really leading the pack, I'd say, with when it comes to it. Like Sony just in general is all about it.
Yeah, I usually tell people that like Sony is leading with software accessibility, just because of the games that they're releasing, the innovations that their studios are doing. You can't really find that across other studios. Not to say that like other studios are failing, but since 2020, Sony has consistently released game after game after game with dozens of features and designs for disabled players.
Yeah, I mean, you have to hope that with, you know, Sony being like a top dog and doing it, that it's eventually going to level up the rest of the industry. Like, even if we're, you know, it's gradual and small increments, like seeing somebody putting so much big focus on it, like you can't just ignore it or hide your head in the sand and be like, oh, we didn't think of this, when these games are like Last of Us, or Spider-Man or God of War Ragnarok are coming out and winning awards for like their accessibility and like really putting it front and center. So, you know, I hope that's a trend that we continue to see. No,
it's really cool. The thing that kind of hit me is that, you know, accessibility is also something that changes for people. My mom is getting on in years, and like she's, you know, there's a lot of stuff she can't do now that she used to be able to do, and like, you know, not to make it selfish, but like I want to play games when I'm old, you know. And it's like the fact that this stuff is being tackled now it's future proofing it for like an entire generation that might not even think about you needing any kind of assistance, but it'll be there when they need it, if they need it, which is cool to think about.
Yeah, I always tell people that accessibility isn't just for disabled people. It could be newborn or new parents who are like maybe holding their child while turning down the volume so they turn on subtitles so they can see. It could be for people in a loud bar watching a game on the TV or, again, subtitles. It could be you have a broken arm for 4 or so weeks, so you start using accessibility controls so you can play, God of War or Spider-Man. It's not just for people like me, it benefits everyone at some point. Being disabled is the only marginalization that can and usually will impact everyone at some point in their life. It's something that just ultimately can't be avoided. Not to be like a Debbie Downer, but like it's just a reality of the situation.
Yeah.
We're all dying, just at different rates.
Yeah. But
well, Grant, this has been huge. Like, thank you for hopping on and talking about this. You're regularly on a column on IGN about accessibility. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I write access design for IGN. It's a monthly column which explores my thoughts about the industry, new releases, what they do right, what they don't do right, my thoughts on tech, like the access controller. It's basically a place for me to demonstrate to audiences why accessibility is relevant and important and why the conversation needs to keep going.
That's great. Yeah, no, my one huge note though is there a reason you didn't call it like access granted or like grant access? Because I feel like that's just
my partner last week, she brought that up. She was like, why is it not called this? I was like, I don't know. I just don't call it for the moment.
Access design is probably better SEO or something. But no, I'm thank you so much for hopping on the show and joining us and talking about this. This has been really cool to hear your thoughts. You were also active on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. Where can people find you on there? Yeah,
you can find me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called today, and probably change tomorrow. At super_crip 1994, and that's usually where I post all my stories I've written. That's where I post pictures of my cat. If you like cats, you can go see that. Yeah, that's usually where I'm more active with my work and
nice. And I've instant follow you. It's cool to see you kind of chime in on stuff and offer like perspective on things that, again, completely just go over my head. But I definitely want to, hear more of what you have to say about this kind of stuff. So thanks for hopping on with us and joining us.
Yeah.
What game are you most excited about playing looking ahead?
For PlayStation?
For anything.
For anything. Ooh. Gosh. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door remake.
Ooh, good choice.
Okay.
Because,
I'll allow it.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite games growing up. So the fact that it's getting a remake, I'm very, very excited for.
Awesome. And
Excellent.
you're powering through Spider-Man and God of War Ragnarok right now?
I am. It's very fun. It's a little bit frustrating because, again, the controller isn't perfect, but it's very fun. They're very, very good games.
What's next on the agenda for PlayStation?
Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
Very good.
Excellent choice.
Good choice.